Welcome to the Darkstream, Vox Day, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. Sorry I'm a little late. I was planning to do a stream tonight, but didn't really have a whole lot on the agenda other than to show you a couple things real quick. This is a book block, and you might ask, Vox, why do you have a book block over in Europe when you're usually the last one to get the books, or at least among the last to get the books, right? And then if I show you this, you realize that, wait a minute, that's not a book I know. That's not one of my ever-growing Castelia Library, Castelia History, Libraria Castelia books. That's something different. That's something darker. You can't read that, so let me read this from you. It was almost impossible to believe that the things which we had seen with our own eyes and heard with our own ears were living truths. Every trace of all that had been was blotted out. The castle stood as before, reared high above a waste of desolation. So perhaps you can already guess what book this is. But what I'm happy to say is that we have completed the printing of Dracula. Here's the title page. And colophon. Dracula by Bram Stoker is the 25th book in the Libraria Castelia series. Okay, this one is a Castelia interior. The illustrations are by Ademir Leal. The text is set in Legitima by César Portas, and the title's in Weiss by Emil Rudolf Weiss. A limited edition of 75. It is printed on cathedral pure paper, Smith sewn and bound in genuine Italian goat skin. So this is a Libraria interior, not a library interior, obviously. Anyhow, this was sent over from our printer partner just so we could approve it, and I intend to do so after this stream. The other thing that you might be interested in seeing, just for kicks, is I think I mentioned on Friday that we had finished our assembly, and this is what the main room of the bindery is looking like at the moment. And so we hope to very soon be doing our first test assemblies in our new location. This was necessary because the machine that you can't really see that's at the very back, that is the foil blocker that stamps the books with 50 tons of pressure, and it didn't fit in our previous location. So, we're on our third bindery location already without really having produced any books yet, but we're getting there. The good news is we're persistent, or maybe we're just stubborn, but we are getting there, and the guys are fired up to get fully into production. So anyhow, that's the bindery news. Quick news drops. Government of France collapsed, but Macron is still in power till 2027, unless he resigns, which he should, but unless he gets his orders from his masters, he won't. German government is very close to collapse. South Korea is in a complete state of disarray. And in Georgia, they are actively arresting the NGOs and other foreign influencers that are attempting to do a color revolution in Georgia, or I should say a second color revolution in Georgia. That's where the first one actually took place. I think it was the Rose Revolution. But anyhow, it's good that nations are no longer permitting those sorts of shenanigans to take over their governments. The thing is, everybody's seen how well it worked out for Ukraine, and pretty much nobody wants to be Clown World or NATO's next proxy army. So, but let's talk about the socio-sexual hierarchy. That's something that I haven't addressed too much lately, although Sigma Game's been quite active. Also, for those of you who are interested, I've now opened it up to paid subscriptions, and thanks to all the supporters who have chosen to actively support Sigma Game that way. We had a good discussion over the past couple days. We heard from some gammas, got a little bit of insight on the gamma perspective, which was, very much in line with what I'd come to expect. But it was good. It was good to hear some guys who are courageous enough to say, "Hey, that's my behavioral pattern. That's where I am, and that's what I am." And there's a reason why all the great philosophers of the past, and some of the not so great ones, all emphasize the importance of knowing yourself. If you don't know yourself and you don't know your enemy, you always lose. If you at least know yourself, you win as often as you lose. And if you can generate the empathy to truly know your enemy, we are assured by Sun Tzu that you will always be victorious. So I realize there's a bit of a tautology there. Well, I didn't win, therefore I don't know either myself or my enemy well enough. There's always a built-in explanation there. But nevertheless, it's still important advice, whether you're talking about, just whether you're the enemy or not. I suppose knowing yourself is even more important if you're the relevant enemy that's standing in the way of what you want to accomplish. But what I'm actually interested in addressing is a point that I didn't know was something that a lot of people struggle with. Today's post that I put up on Sigma Game was about, let's go take a look at it, shall we? What it was about was the problem that people have with binary thinking. I called it Simpletons and the SSH. 87 commenters, so it's obviously been subject of some discussion. But what I was pointing out is that the old definition of simpleton is actually indicative of a binary thinker. This is my illustration of Abelard talking to Heloise about whether it is so or it is not so. Fencing Bear did object that this was not the end all of his philosophy, which is of course true, but I just thought he was given that he was famous for his "it is so" or "it is not so," he's a good philosophical illustration of a binary thinker, even though he was not necessarily limited to it. But I do want to look more deeply into that before I accept what I've been told. Anyhow, we got into the discussion though. Powerful gammas, are they just situational alphas or bravos, etc., etc.? And we all know the figure of the wicked vizier. We read about that starting with C.S. Lewis, the wicked vizier, the evil advisor. We saw it with Wormtongue in the Lord of the Rings, and I didn't realize that some people actually have trouble distinguishing a situational role from a sociosexual behavioral pattern. Now, it's a bit confusing because, of course, we talk about status and we talk about rank. And these are useful terms, but they cover a broad spectrum of meanings. They cover a wide variety of topics. You have different status in your high school than you do in your college. You have different status on your Pee-wee baseball team than you do on the varsity football team. I was a NCAA Division I athlete. I was a conference champion, state level competitor, but on my Pee-wee football team, I never got to play. Never once got to play. The irony is, there was a good reason why I never got to play. I had the bad fortune to probably be on the only little kids team in the entire state that happened to start a kid who ended up being a similarly fast state class track athlete, but also being larger, went on to become a Division II All-American. It's not really a big mystery why I never got to play. That's one reason why I focused on soccer in Minnesota at the high school level. Soccer and football take place in the fall at the same time. So unlike in Texas and other places where soccer is a spring sport, you have to choose. And I naturally gravitated towards soccer because my early experience with football was very negative. It was mostly involved sitting on the bench, although in a event that presaged Rudy Rudiger's famous sack in his last Notre Dame game, I did actually somehow ended up getting lined up on the defensive line and getting a sack in my last game playing Pee-wee football. So it's never a good sign if your athletic career can be reasonably compared to Rudy Rudiger's, let's face it. Anyhow, the point is your status is different in different situations. So no matter what you are, whether you're an alpha, whether you're an omega, whether you're a gamma, whether you're a bravo, you will, not you may, you absolutely will find yourself in a situational role to which you are not suited. And so when we're talking about the wicked vizier, when we're talking about the subversive advisor, who are we talking about? We're not talking about alphas, obviously. We're not talking about, we're talking about gammas. How does a gamma get into a position of power and influence? Well, it's pretty obvious. They do it through politicking. And there's also, of course, just the accidents of birth. There's the Indian tactic of sending in the smart cousin to interview for the job and then sending the not so smart cousin in to actually take the job. It's kind of crazy. I know that sounds absolutely absurd, but the problem is so common that Silicon Valley companies are having to do some pretty serious ID checks of potential candidates now, job candidates. That's what a shift from a high trust society to a low trust society looks like. But the point is that the natural core behavioral pattern that you have is not defined by, nor is it necessarily harmonious with whatever your situational role happens to be. one of the problems, and Owen has complained about this before, when you've got a sigma who's ultimately in charge of the corporations, it becomes much, much more decentralized by necessity. The various bravos running things have to make up for the fact that I'm not a proper alpha. I'm not an alpha. I'm not going to give them directions and instructions and orders and that sort of thing the way that a proper alpha leader would. Fortunately, I happen to be reasonably skilled when it comes to vision. So at least that's one aspect of the situational role that I can fulfill properly. But, all the various lieutenants in charge of the different projects, they could provide you with a laundry list of my shortcomings as a leader, as a manager, as the situational alpha. So it's really important. This is the source, just so you understand, this is the source of the Peter Principle. The Peter Principle is a very famous business concept that says everyone gets promoted to failure. In other words, when you do a good job and you prove that you can do that job well, the corporate management will customarily raise you up until you reach the level that you can't perform and at which you fail. So, the young sales guy who's a good sales guy, first he gets to move to a bigger region, then he gets moved to the central office, and then he gets promoted to sales manager, which he doesn't necessarily, which he can't necessarily do. Now, sometimes you've got people who are supremely talented, and that's the old bright lights, big city. I started in the mailroom and worked his way all the way up to CEO. That does happen. It can happen. Yordamon is gracious enough to say that there are some upsides to the situation of having a Sigma in charge. And he points out that one of them is that it's never boring. So Sigmas keep things interesting. Both men and women will usually tell you that. And they're usually glad when the Sigma finally moves on to something else. But anyhow, for most people, most men are deltas. And, if you're a good, competent delta, then it's going to be difficult for you to either fulfill a Bravo role or an Alpha role for different reasons. Deltas, somewhat to my surprise, because this is not something that I had ever thought about until my eyes were open to it, although it does make sense in retrospect. Deltas are, they tend to be remarkably narcissistic and not self-centered exactly. And they're not really, technically it's not true narcissism, but it's the best way to understand it, in that the delta is really only concerned with his job and his responsibilities. He really only cares about what everybody else is doing insofar as it affects his ability to do his job. Now, this is something that we correctly praise. We correctly praise people who are absolutely focused on doing their job and doing it as well as they can and being competent. Those are all good things. But there's always a but. Every strength has some sort of corresponding weakness. And the weakness of the delta situation that dooms them when it comes to trying to fulfill a situational Bravo or Alpha role is that the Bravo and the Alpha roles require spending most of your focus on other people. Your job literally becomes paying attention to what other people's jobs are and understanding why they're being successful and why they're not. The Bravo, obviously, being the policeman of the hierarchy, they make the good middle managers and the junior, the junior executives and that sort of thing. They've got fundamentally two roles. One is to be the point of contact with the alpha and to sort of manage the relationship with the alpha. But then they also have to police everybody else. Now, if you're a delta and all you really care about is your own work, how do you square that circle? How do you address the issue of needing to not only pay attention to other people's work, but actually to focus on it, to make that your priority? It's fundamentally against the grain of the way that the delta thinks. And so you can see where the Peter principle applies. If you promote a delta to a Bravo role, there's a very good chance that he's going to fail. Cactus Eater Bear says, my delta husband is shaking his head at the idea of focusing on other people. Yeah, that was really eye-opening to me. And this is why I really value the commenters at Sigma Game and the discourse that takes place there, because through the questions, through the never-ending conversation and that sort of thing, we begin to recognize some of the deeper patterns that are not necessarily obvious to a superficial analysis. Does bureaucracy start from over-promoted deltas? I would say probably not. I think that bureaucracy is more likely from over-promoted gammas, or it's got to, you can't blame that one on women. Men produce bureaucracy without any help from women. I'm guessing, but it could come from. It does make some sense in that because the delta doesn't want to engage in active policing, it's easier to just come up with general systems and rules and expect everybody to abide by them. But there's something wrong about that in my something strikes me as wrong about that. It's a good question. I'll have to think about that more. But the thing that was really shocking was to realize that alphas, who we tend to think of as being very self-centered, they're always beating their chest, they're always looking out for challenges from other people. We tend to think of them as being very self-focused, and they are very self-focused in some ways. Certainly when it comes to their own desires and objectives and that sort of thing. But if you look at what an alpha does, an alpha spends most of his time thinking about other people. He doesn't spend much time thinking about himself. He doesn't even spend that much time thinking about his mission. He spends most of his time overseeing the hierarchy. If you read any history about a king, what does the king have to spend all his time doing? He's basically spending all his time juggling his nobles. Basically, he's just trying to manage all of the conflict and the internal struggles within his hierarchy. This is why, to a Sigma, the alpha role just looks dreadful. It basically the Sigma takes one look at it, makes you want to walk away. Eric says, as a captain, that's why it was my team and I wanted all my guys to succeed. Yeah. I've told you guys this story before, but the best captain I ever had was Alex Calls, who was the captain of my high school varsity soccer team. And uh, unfortunately, he died about 13, 14 years ago. Um, but he was a real character. I think I can honestly say that we were friendly. I wouldn't necessarily say that we were friends, but we were definitely friendly, and I'm pleased that we last time I saw him we were happy to see each other. It was we got to do some reminiscing and all that. That was fun. But um, you know we got into a pretty good scuffle one day at practice. Every now and then he was an all Midwest strong ball controlling midfielder. And one day at practice, he just, was coming at me. He was just going to flatten me, basically. He would do that from time to time to the players, as alphas do. Anyhow, I was not in the mood to get flattened, so I threw an elbow right as he came at me and put him down. And I swear to you, he bounced. I mean, he bounced right off and I took off. Now, you know, I'm a Division One sprinter. He was not going to catch me, but he was going to do his damnedest to. So he's chasing me, and the team's chasing him, and the coach is yelling, all this sort of thing. Anyhow, the next day, we would all wear our jerseys, or we'd all wear suits and coats and ties or whatever. I think the next day, because we had a game the next day, and so the captains announced, okay, tomorrow everybody wear your jerseys. And I remember walking down the hall and seeing him coming at me, and and I legitimately thought there was a decent chance that he was just going to punch me in the face as we walked past. But he just looked at me and nodded, and so I was like, okay, cool. You know, at least I'm not going to die today. Um, and so uh, during the game, I somehow got into a scuffle with two of the Hill Murray players, and um, at one point I was actually on the ground uh, and with fighting two of them at the same time. And all of a sudden, there's just this wham. Something just hit the three of us, fighting on the ground, and I roll over and look up, and my captain, who had been trying to kill me the day before, is literally standing over me, fists up, shouting at the others. He was. It didn't matter that he wasn't happy with me. I was one of his guys. He's the alpha. He's the captain. You don't mess with it. And so, that's what alphas do. Poll Made Me Do It says when Trump got shot, he said his first thought was to make sure that people don't panic. Yeah, I mean, what was he doing? What's he famous for? Putting his fist up and saying, "Fight, fight, fight." You know, he's thinking about other people, not himself. You know, Alpha. I mean, he won so many people when he said, "They're not after me, they're after you. I'm just standing in the way." And then he said, I said something like, I'm proud to take these arrows for you. And that sort of leadership is a form of self-sacrifice. That's what Jesus meant when he said, the first shall be last. That's one of the things he meant by that. C.S. Lewis puts it best in A Horse and His Boy. King Loon tells his newly discovered heir, Prince Kor, or Shasta, he tells him to be a king is to be first in every battle, last in every retreat, and to smile and make more jolly over a scantier meal than any man in the kingdom. What a leader does, for example, in a company, a bad leader just lays people off and then pays himself a bonus. A good leader, if the company has to tighten its belts, a good leader cuts his salary first and more than everybody else. That's the difference. How do you balance that with the focus on the self and the focus on one's own job with that kind of mentality? You don't. That's why deltas tend to fail when they find themselves in a situational alpha role. Bravos don't usually have a problem with that side of it. They tend to lack the vision. So they tend to focus on, well, we've got all the right metrics and we've got all the best practices and we're improving all the details. And meanwhile, they completely miss the next opportunity and they have their lunch eaten by a smaller competitor. Totally normal. Happens all the time. And so, it's so important to understand the difference and the distinction between the situational role and the sociosexual behavioral pattern. The more deeply you understand the distinction between those things, the better that you're going to put yourself in the right positions, avoid putting yourself in the wrong positions, and also understand when other people are likely to succeed or fail. I mean, that's the beauty of the SSH. That's the power of the SSH, is it provides you with a predictive model for other people's behavior. That's what it's about. So anyhow, so like I said, this is going to be a bit of a short stream. I do have one thing for you though. Owen and I were talking about 2 years ago, and Owen's obviously is into doing music. I am as well. In fact, Owen's had a lot of success with his piano stuff recently, which is really cool. Makes me want to definitely get some of this stuff out there. But if you look over here on the Voxophonic channel, what we have here is I've just added 2 Christmas carols up there. One of the things that Owen and I had talked about really wanting to do is we had talked about this, how all of these Christmas carols, some of which I love. Silver Bells is one of my all-time favorite Christmas carols. And what is Silver Bells about? People shopping. Okay? It's part of that early mid 20th century Jewish subversion of the Christmas holiday. It preceded and presaged the attempt to replace Christmas with Xmas and Happy Holidays. It was not accidental. They wanted to replace Silent Night, Holy Night with Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Now, there's nothing wrong with Santa Claus is Coming to Town. There's nothing wrong with Silver Bells. But what is the point of celebrating the trappings of the holiday and not the point of the holiday itself? You can love those songs, and I do. I don't apologize for loving the Christmas carols that I enjoy so much, but the songs that matter are the ones that talk about Jesus, that talk about the Christmas story. There's so much more power in a song like Adeste Fideles than in, All I Want for Christmas Is You. And so, so what Owen and I were talking about was how we really wanted to bring back. I wanted to do a Christmas Carol, but I wanted to do something that was meaningful, that was actually about the Christian aspects of the celebration of Jesus Christ's birth. So anyhow, I wrote this song with considerable. I mean, you know how I do it. It's an AI song, but I think you'll like this. Owen actually played it on his stream, and apparently it was well received there. I got an email from I think Rachel might have caught it when she was watching, or maybe I sent her and John a version of it. Anyhow, but I've put together a couple different versions. So in the lead up to Christmas, we'll obviously do a Booster Patrol Christmas, like we have. We'll do the big listening party. That seems to be a nice tradition. I think that, and I hopefully Elizabeth will actually be here, so hopefully we can do them together again. But in the meantime, I wanted to introduce you to a song called This Very Night, and this is the Christmas Bear mix, which is, I'm just going to explain in advance. There's one line that you might go, well, that's a little bit prosaic. It was because it was for Owen, him being the white supremacist, just reminding the white supremacists that Christmas is for everyone, great and small, one and all, short and tall. So anyhow, without further ado, I will play this for you, and then like I said, it's kind of like 4 more years. I'm having a good time doing some different mixes, but this is the Christmas Bear mix. So please enjoy, and I will tap out with the song. So thanks for listening to the Darkstream, and we will see you at the next one. So let's turn this on, make sure we got the volume on, and headphones. Go ahead and if you like it, let me know on Social Galactic.
Stars above shine ever bright. Angels sing with pure delight of Mary born this sacred night. Comes our Savior Jesus Christ. Shepherds hear the holy call, heaven's gift for one and all. In the darkness shines a light, a Savior born this very night. Heartfelt prayers on Christmas Eve, in His grace we now perceive, and by faith do we believe, the King of Kings shall we receive. Hallelujah, raise your voice, in His birth now we rejoice. Come to Jesus, short and tall, By this birth are we set free. Heartfelt prayers on Christmas Eve. In His grace we now perceive, and by faith do we believe the King of Kings shall we receive. Hallelujah, raise your voice. In His birth now we rejoice. This is Christmas, heed the call. He has come to save us all. Hallelujah, raise your voice. In His birth now we rejoice. This is Christmas, heed the call. Jesus came to save us all. He came